You've described her as a perfect child.
I did. She was just so easy.
It's almost as tall as you are.
How would you describe your niece, Sierah?
Vivacious. I couldn't get enough of her.
She was a ball of energy.
My name's Sierah.
You just couldn't stop laughing and having fun with her.
At some point in the early evening of July 19, 2016, 20-year-old Sierah Joughin set out on a short bicycle ride home through rural Fulton County, Ohio. She never arrived. Her bicycle was found that same night near the edge of a cornfield off the road she had been riding. No collision damage. No sign she had been struck by a car. But nearby, tire tracks that didn't belong to any car, and a scattering of items that meant nothing to investigators yet. Sierah was simply gone. The investigation that followed would become one of the most disturbing criminal cases in Ohio's recent history, not only because of what had been done to Sierah, but because of what investigators found when they searched the property of the man responsible. Because he was not a stranger who had passed through. He was not a predator from somewhere else who had vanished back into the country. He had been there the whole time, living on the very same road Sierah did. A neighbor, in the way rural communities define that word, someone everyone had driven past 100 times without a second thought. And when investigators finally searched his property, they found something that would later be described in court as some of the most disturbing evidence ever placed before a Fulton County jury. Something that raised a question investigators still couldn't answer. Had this happened before? How could a woman disappear while riding her bicycle just minutes from home? This is the story of Sierah Joughin, and the discovery that would leave investigators asking a question they could never fully put to rest: how many times had this happened before, and how many women might never have had the chance to say so? Sierah Joughin was 20 years old. She grew up in Northwest Ohio, loved animals and horses, and was known by the people around her as the person who noticed when others were struggling, and did something about it. A 2014 graduate of Evergreen High School, she was entering her junior year at the University of Toledo, where she studied human resource management and was a member of the Alpha Kappa Psi business fraternity. She was close to her family, in a relationship with Josh Kolosinski, and had spent her entire life in the Fulton County community where she disappeared. On July 19, 2016, she set out on a short bicycle ride home. She never arrived. At around 6:45 in the evening, Sierah and Josh Kolosinski reached County Road 6, near Metamora. He'd ridden alongside her on his motorcycle for most of the trip back from his house. This was where they split. She had less than half a mile left to go. He kissed her goodbye, told her he loved her, and asked her to text him when she got home. The text never came. Josh tried calling. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail again. Sierah was not someone who went quiet without reason, not for an evening, and certainly not after promising to check in. The silence was wrong within the hour, and it only got harder to explain as that hour became several. By that night, her family had alerted the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. From the very first call, investigators recognized the situation for what it was. A 20-year-old woman, less than half a mile from home, gone without a text, without a call, without any explanation that fit. Later that evening, a deputy found her bicycle in a cornfield off County Road 6, roughly half a mile from her house, exactly where she should have almost been home. No crash. No damage consistent with being struck by a vehicle. But the scene wasn't clean, either. Nearby, a pair of men's sunglasses, a screwdriver, a box of fuses, and tire tracks pressed into the broken cornstalks that didn't belong to any car. None of it made sense yet. All of it would matter later. A Bureau of Criminal Investigation agent was called to the scene overnight, in the dark, hours after Sierah was last seen. Whatever this was, it was already being treated as something far more serious than a young woman who'd lost track of time. The next day, a farmer in Michigan who had been driving through the area the night before saw the news of Sierah's disappearance, and realized the motorcycle helmet he'd picked up off the roadside on his way home might matter. It was stained with blood. He brought it to police. Whoever that helmet belonged to had been there. And they had been bleeding. The search continued through the days that followed. And then, in another cornfield a few miles away, it ended. Sierah Joughin's body was found on July 22nd, 3 days after she'd said goodbye to Josh on County Road 6, less than half a mile from home. The question was no longer where Sierah was. The question was who had done this. The answer would lead investigators to a man living less than a mile from where her remains were found. And to a discovery, hidden inside his barn, that would leave even veteran investigators stunned by what they found. In the days between Sierah's disappearance and the discovery of her body, Fulton County mounted one of the largest volunteer search efforts in its recent history. Law enforcement from multiple agencies coordinated across the area, and volunteers who had never met Sierah moved through fields and road corridors in the July heat, because in a county this size, that distinction barely exists. Before any of that could move forward in good conscience, investigators had to ask an uncomfortable question first. Josh Kolosinski had been the last person to see Sierah alive. He rode a motorcycle, and a motorcycle had just become physical evidence in this case, in the form of tire tracks in a cornfield no one could yet explain. In any disappearance, the last person to see the victim gets looked at hard, whether or not anyone believes they're guilty. It's not an accusation. It's elimination. Investigators looked. They found nothing that pointed toward him, no inconsistency, no evidence, nothing that placed him anywhere but exactly where he said he'd been. Josh cooperated fully and immediately, the way someone with nothing to hide cooperates. Sierah's own family never doubted him for a moment. With Josh cleared, the case opened back up in a direction nobody wanted, a stranger, on a quiet road, in a county where strangers are rare enough that everyone notices them. Sierah's family moved through the worst days of their lives searching land they should never have had to search. Cornfields don't give anything up easily in late July. By that point in the season, the stalks stand taller than most of the people searching them, planted in rows that run for hundreds of yards without a break, every row looking identical to the one beside it. Someone could walk past something a few feet away and never see it. It is some of the hardest terrain there is to search by sight alone. Within hours of the missing persons report, volunteers, K-9 units, and agents from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation were already moving through those fields, dogs trained to follow a scent no human eye could trace, volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder so nothing could slip past the line. It was slow, deliberate work, because rushing a search like this risks destroying the very evidence it's trying to find. For 3 days, that search produced exhaustion, heat, and very little else. Sierah's family stood at the center of it, watching strangers do the one thing they couldn't bear to stop doing themselves. And while that visible search was underway, a quieter, more methodical effort was running alongside it. Investigators began going door to door along County Road 6, the road Sierah lived on, the road her bicycle had been found near. Talking to neighbors. Asking who had been around, who had seen anything, who might know something without realizing it mattered. It was, by every account, routine work. The kind that usually produces nothing more than alibis and reassurances. One of the stops on that list was the home of a man named James Worley, who lived further down the same road. There was nothing yet that pointed to him specifically. He was simply a name on a list of people who needed to be talked to, the way every name on that list needed to be talked to. What happened at that door would change the entire direction of the investigation. James Worley was 57 years old, one of dozens of names on the canvas list. When investigators knocked on his door, he didn't hesitate to talk. That, it would turn out, was the mistake. Unprompted, Worley told investigators a story that he'd been out riding his motorcycle that evening, that it had broken down near a cornfield, and that in the confusion he'd lost his helmet, a screwdriver, his sunglasses, and a box of fuses. Investigators didn't react. Not yet. Back at the station, one detail wouldn't sit still. Nobody had asked Worley about a helmet. Nobody had mentioned sunglasses. The department hadn't released a word to the public about a box of fuses found near Sierah's bicycle. And yet James Worley had explained every one of those items, unprompted, before any investigator had brought up a single one of them. It's the kind of mistake detectives rarely get handed. Guilty people, more often than they realize, know things they shouldn't know. Innocent people almost never do, because an innocent person doesn't walk in with a ready explanation for evidence nobody has described to them yet. It still wasn't proof. A coincidence, however unlikely, remained technically possible. So investigators went looking for something that wasn't. They obtained security footage from the Evergreen High School complex on County Road 6, the road connecting Worley's property to the spot where Sierah had vanished. It showed a motorcycle traveling that stretch of road at almost exactly the time investigators believed she disappeared. When they brought that footage back to Worley, his story changed. He denied being on County Road 6 at all that evening, flatly, the opposite of what the footage showed. Confronted again, he admitted he had lied. A man claiming innocence had just been caught lying, on camera, about the one fact that mattered most, where he had actually been. Investigators pulled his criminal record. This wasn't the first time James Worley had appeared in a criminal courtroom. And what they were about to learn would make the search of his property far more urgent than a routine warrant. Investigators searched Worley's red pickup truck first. Inside, a can of pepper spray, a black ski mask, work gloves, a roll of duct tape, 7 zip ties. None of it explained anything on its own. Together, it read like a kit. Then came his motorcycle, found inside his barn, weeds still tangled in it, along with handcuff keys, 2 sets of handcuffs, a zip tie, and a bottle of bleach. And the helmet the Michigan farmer had turned in tested positive for blood belonging to both Worley and Sierah Joughin. Investigators continued through the property. Everything would eventually need to stand before a jury, so the search moved the way a formal search requires, methodical, documented, nothing skipped. And then, in the barn, they found an area concealed behind stacked hay bales. Behind it, a crate. Inside the crate, bondage clothing, restraints, latex gloves, women's lingerie sealed in plastic bags, rope, and a sex toy. Nearby, hidden in the same space, a carpeted, secured freezer. There was blood inside it. This wasn't equipment assembled in a single panicked night. It was a kit, kept, maintained, and concealed, the kind of thing a person builds a habit around, not the kind of thing a person improvises in the hours after a crime. For what? Then investigators found something else. James Worley had done this before. Not allegedly. Not in a disputed or contested incident. In July of 1990, Worley had knocked a 26-year-old woman named Robin Gardner off her bicycle with his truck, pulled her into the cab, and handcuffed her. She escaped and reported what had happened. Worley was convicted of abduction and sentenced to 4 to 10 years in prison. He served 3. The victim survived. And when he was released, there was nowhere for his name to go. Ohio's offender registries at the time covered sex offenses specifically, and Worley's conviction, an abduction, didn't fit the legal category that would have required him to register anywhere the public, or even most of law enforcement, could easily find. The system knew his name. It knew his address. It knew his conviction. What it had no mechanism to do was connect that conviction to anywhere he could be found, 26 years later, by anyone checking. During his mandated counseling after the 1990 conviction, Worley had told a therapist something that, in hindsight, read less like a confession and more like a warning nobody had been positioned to hear, that he had learned something from the abduction he'd already committed, and that he didn't intend to leave a survivor next time. Which left a question that would outlast the trial, the verdict, and everything still to come. If the law already knew exactly what kind of danger James Worley was, why was knowing not enough to find him? James Worley was arrested. He was charged with aggravated murder. The case was handed to prosecutors. 12 jurors were about to hear all of it. The trial of James Worley opened in Fulton County, Ohio, in March of 2018. James Worley had been arrested. But an arrest isn't a conviction. And this was a death penalty case, tried in the community where it happened, in front of jurors who lived on the same roads, in the same county, as everyone this case had touched. Fulton County prosecutor Scott Hazelman framed it simply for the jury: follow the trail of evidence. Defense attorney Merle Deck countered that the state could not prove Worley's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Josh Kolosinski took the stand and testified through tears about the last time he saw Sierah, a kiss goodbye, her telling him she didn't need him to walk her out. Then the forensic testimony. Investigators walked the jury through the items recovered from the truck, the motorcycle, and the concealed area in the barn. The blood-stained helmet. The duct tape, which carried DNA from both Worley and Sierah. The chain of custody connecting each item to a lab, and each result back to a courtroom exhibit. The defense offered an explanation for the lingerie, the restraints, and the hidden crate. Worley claimed he had been assembling supplies for a pornographic business he intended to start. He maintained he had never met Sierah Joughin, and that his DNA and belongings were at the scene only because his motorcycle happened to break down there that evening, by coincidence, hours before she disappeared. No cross-examination produced an explanation for why his blood and hers were on the same helmet. Then came the testimony connecting this case to 1990. Robin Gardner took the stand. She described, in her own words, an evening in July of 1990 when Worley's truck knocked her off her bicycle. Being pulled into the cab. The handcuffs. Escaping before he could finish what he'd started. She had lived with that memory for 26 years. Now she was describing it out loud, in a courtroom, to 12 strangers deciding whether the same man had finally killed someone. Over the defense's objection that the two cases were too different to compare, prosecutors argued the opposite. A woman, alone, on a bicycle, in a rural setting, approached and restrained by the same man, 26 years apart. The court allowed the jury to hear it. For people who had followed this case from the beginning, Gardner's testimony landed differently than the forensic evidence had. DNA convinces a jury on the facts. A survivor, sitting a few feet away, describing the exact thing that almost happened to her, reminds a jury why the conviction matters in the first place. The prosecution's argument went further than premeditation alone. Worley, they argued, had killed Sierah Joughin specifically to keep her from doing what Robin Gardner had done in 1990, surviving, and testifying. A previously convicted abductor, attacking again, had every reason to make sure this victim couldn't identify him. That reasoning became its own charge, aggravated murder with a specification that Worley killed to escape detection for the kidnapping. The medical examiner's testimony was brief and clinical. Sierah had died of asphyxiation. There was no evidence she had been sexually assaulted. The defense rested. The jury deliberated. How could a woman disappear while riding her bicycle just minutes from home? In that deliberation room, 12 people from Fulton County had the full answer to that question sitting in front of them. On March 27, 2018, the jury convicted James Worley on 17 of the 19 counts against him, including aggravated murder with a specification that the killing was committed to escape detection for kidnapping her, kidnapping, felonious assault, possessing criminal tools, tampering with evidence, and having weapons while under disability. The combination of charges made him eligible for the death penalty. The sentencing phase followed. Prosecutors pointed to the concealed restraints, the freezer, the 1990 conviction, and the deliberate nature of the crime. They asked the jury to conclude that nothing less than death was proportionate to what James Worley had done to Sierah Joughin. The jury recommended death. On April 19, 2018, the judge sentenced James Worley to death. In the courtroom, Sierah Joughin's family was present. As they had been for every hearing, every day of testimony, every piece of evidence entered into the record. They were present because bearing witness to accountability is one of the only things a family can do when everything else has been taken from them. James Worley was sent to death row. The legal case was resolved. Sierah's family was not done. The verdict answered one question. It did not address the one Sierah's family could not stop asking. James Worley had been convicted of abduction in 1990. He had served his time. And when he was released, there was no requirement that his name appear in any database the public, or most law enforcement, could search. He simply went home, to the same road, in the same county, where he would live for the next 26 years. Sierah's family decided that gap needed to close. In December of 2018, Ohio Governor John Kasich signed Senate Bill 67 into law, known publicly as Sierah's Law. It created Ohio's first geographically searchable database of violent offenders, people convicted of crimes like murder, voluntary manslaughter, kidnapping, and felony abduction. Under the law, those offenders must register with their county sheriff upon release from prison and maintain that registration for at least 10 years. Members of the public can request the names, photos, and addresses of registered violent offenders living near them through their local sheriff's office. It was not the sex offender registry. It was something Ohio hadn't had before, a way to track people convicted of violence that didn't happen to be sexual in nature, exactly the category James Worley's 1990 conviction had fallen into, and exactly the category that had let him disappear back into ordinary life. If Sierah's Law had existed before July 19, 2016, James Worley's name and address would have been part of a searchable public record. Whether that would have changed what happened to Sierah is a question without a certain answer. What is certain is that the information would have existed. It hadn't. It does now. In the years since the law took effect, nearly 6,000 violent offenders have been entered into Ohio's database. There remains one question this case never fully closed. Robin Gardner, the woman who survived Worley's attack in 1990, has said publicly that she doesn't believe she and Sierah were his only victims, that 26 years is a long time for a man like that to have stayed still. It is a question investigators have continued to look into, and one Sierah's own family has said they hope keeps getting asked. The community of Fulton County holds Sierah's memory the way communities hold the memory of someone they actually knew. As the person who noticed when others were struggling, who loved horses and rode her bike home on a summer evening, minutes from a house she never made it back to. She deserved to make it back. Sierah's Law exists because her family refused to let the answer to that stop at a verdict.